Hi everybody, welcome to the St. Louis Angular Lunch, August 2016. I'm Kyle Cordes at Oasis Digital. We have a pretty small group in the audience today, but we have some people who have been using Angular 2 pretty heavily, so I think we're going to have a really good discussion about the mayhem around the recently added NgModule feature. I hate about me slides, so I have a very brief one here. The most relevant part of this slide is my Twitter handle, if you think I'm wrong, and the fact that I kind of wrangle our curriculum at Angular Bootcamp. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about NgModules. We're going to talk about when. When do you start using NgModules? Well, you can start using them as of Angular 2 RC5. You must start using them as of Angular 2 RC6, which doesn't have a date, but a wild guess would be in the next couple weeks. Then we're going to talk about why you have to use NgModules. Why does this feature exist? We'll look at a few links. We'll see some examples of how they work. We'll talk about the name, and then we'll have some discussion on some topics. We're going to try to do all that in something like 20 minutes. So what time is it right now? What's our time look like?
23.
Okay, well, somebody wave at me if I get to 20 minutes and we're not already discussing. Okay, so why do we need modules? The essence of why we need modules is that we've been working on getting lazy loading and template precompilation for a long time. I don't know if those were actually mentioned at the infamous Tombstone talk that introduced Angular 2. I didn't go back and look, but they've certainly been discussed since that era. So this idea of having template compilation and lazy loading, this goes back a long time. What the team found is that to make all that actually work, there was this latent idea of an Angular level module that needed to be added in. So we get lazy loading by having it. To support that, we need a context for the template compiler, so we can have the template compiler. There's a perceived need for a kind of a coarse-grained organization tool, and these provide that purpose. And then lastly, there are various kind of free-floating concepts up through Angular RC4, and those concepts are now kind of glued together in RC5. So modules kind of connect some things that had been sort of, what's the right word, philosophically connected before, and now they're connected in the software. To give it more of a sense of what modules are, if you imagine in this carefully constructed diagram that each, I guess, brown box is a component, so the brown boxes represent a component hierarchy in an Angular 2 application, there's this notion of grabbing subsets of those components, drawing these dotted lines in my diagram and saying, well, this group of components comprise an Angular module or an NgModule. So in what I've drawn here, we have so one at the very top, and then 2, 3, 4 modules kind of across the middle of the diagram, and then one more module at the bottom. And I think I can actually, if I press a button here, I can actually wave around the screen, and it makes a little better recording. Okay, but this is the basic idea. So with lazy loading, for example, you might say we're going to preload the module at the top, which is this one, and then we're going to lazily load, maybe this represents one route. So that's the idea of lazy loading. That means that a module is a group of components, or it's a container of components, something like that. Most people put their links at the end of talks. I like to put them at the beginning so people know that I figured this out, not on my own, but by reading what other smart people wrote. If you just read the documentation for NgModule, it's actually surprisingly good considering that it came out something like a week and a half ago as I stand here. Obviously, the documentation team has been really on the ball, keeping up with NgModule during its development, and it's great to see that most of the stuff you need to know is right there in the official documentation. I would encourage everybody to read it. If you want to know how it came to be the way it is, the core team has also nicely published a couple of documents relevant to that. They have kind of this understanding was written later, kind of after modules emerged, and there was this design document that was being worked on kind of at the beginning of the module effort a couple of months ago. So that's worth reading if you want to understand more of the background. Then lastly, if you want to get just a direct, specific explanation of lazy loading, this is the place you go. Important caveat on the slide here. So everything you knew about Angular 2 lazy loading and or routing from more than a couple months ago is just obsolete. It's from ideas that were happening during development. All that stuff is deprecated or deleted by now. This was the only current thing that I found as of this moment that will really explain how to make lazy loading work and how it ties into modules. Okay, so how do modules work? Well, you define a module. We're going to see this in code in a few minutes. You take the things that you used to use directives and pipes for in your Angular 2 program. So up through, I guess, whatever, maybe Alpha 20 or so at Oasis Digital, we started using Angular 2 a bit. So Alpha 20 through RC4, you had these features where you could say directives and pipes in a component. You remove those from your components and you move those to your module definition to start using modules. And then once you've done that, you bootstrap a module instead of bootstrapping a component. Now there's obviously more to it, but that's the essence of how you make them work. Now we're going to take a look at some snippets of code. These are borrowed from our Angular Bootcamp curriculum. We don't have these currently published online. That's kind of moot, though, because these are very small, simple examples, and you can consult the official documentation for kind of the more official examples. And then after that, we'll take a look at that blog post that I mentioned to show a couple of snippets more relevant specifically to lazy loading. Okay. I'll sit down for this part. And somebody, once I get going here, somebody make sure I'm okay with... Okay, so, big. Back row, can you read it? Back row can read it? Okay, if back row can read it, people watching online should be able to read it. Okay, so this, sorry about to our camera operator here that I keep standing up and sitting down, so hopefully it'll be okay. This is a simplest working example. So you have some kind of Angular program, and don't worry about this kind of training kit stuff. This is irrelevant to understanding the modules. You have some Angular program, and it has some element which is going to get bootstrapped into an Angular application. We have a component. This is a really simple component, right? It has no code, and it has a one-line inline template, right? So this is like Angular, the thing you learn in your first 10 minutes of Angular 2. Well, as of RC5, you could still put a traditional bootstrap line at the bottom of this and it would work. But as of RC6, that traditional bootstrap mechanism is deleted from Angular, and so you have to do something like this. So this is the simplest useful or simplest working Angular 2 NgModule. You sort of, I guess in air quotes here, you have to do it this way now. Here's a tip. If you use the Angular 2 CLI, you don't have to because it does it for you. But if you're coding by hand, this is what you do. So with Angular through RC4, the browser features like ngIf and ng4, they were kind of built in magically. With RC5, there's a thing called browser module. So browser module, this contains the browser-specific parts of Angular 2. We had a thing called Bootstrap we would import. Now we import a thing called Platform Browser Dynamic, and we call Bootstrap module on it. So it's just a little bit of syntactic change there. NgModule, this is just so we can say NgModule, right? So line 3 is just to make line 10 work, and then line 5 is grabbing our component. Right? So the imports are a little bit changed. This is a purely mechanical change, though. We've updated many programs to RC5, and this part of it is just a quick copy and paste. You just have to, they've changed the API a little bit. No big deal. But here's where we get interesting. Naming is a hard problem, right? So we have, I would say in our experience, among people working with Angular 2, adoption of the Bootstrap CSS framework has got to be at least 80%. So 80% of Angular people have a potential confusion here. This is still an Angular Bootstrap. It is not a CSS Bootstrap. So you make a module, you bootstrap the module. Now, the interesting bit is just you're bootstrapping the class. Line 17, you never have to make an instance of this thing. Further, there are some things you can type in here, but in many cases you won't. So essentially this class is really just a place to hang this metadata off with the decorator. So going into the meeting here, on line, I'm going to talk about these out of order. So on line 13, when you say bootstrap this component, that's just whatever component you would have written in your bootstrap previously. And I actually have a way of showing the diff. I don't know how nicely it will appear, but yeah, okay. I can't easily show the exact diff to get the code side by side. But this replaces that bootstrap line. You bootstrap a module, then a module bootstraps a component. So again, naming's a little bit hard to get your head around, but functionally it works almost exactly as it did before. Then line 12, that says this module depends on other modules, right? So there's an important clue here. We have a dependency tree of modules. So an Angular 2 program, as of RC5, is composed of a fine-grained component tree with a coarse-grained module tree overlaid over it. And further, the modules you write, in my case I'm writing one module, this module alone, really, it can't even work with browser stuff. It can't even do ngIf. You need to say, go grab the browser module to get the browser kit. Okay, so any questions about this bit so far before I go on to the next? Okay, good. Okay, Paul, do you remember how many steps down I need to get to a more complicated?
I do not, off the top of my head.
I'll get there in just a minute. Here we go. Okay, so here is a more complicated Angular 2 program. Now, the contents of the program don't matter too much. These are just really, really simple. Again, really simple components. No meaningful functionality, trivial templates, stuff that you would pick up with Angular 2 very early in your learning. But we have to put them in a module to use them. So if we flip back to, I think I might just move this out of the way. Looking back here, if I want to define this module, I got to say what components are in the module, and that looks like so. So line 10 is simply saying that here are the components that are in this module. And I believe that's the only difference in this module setup from the one we looked at a couple of minutes ago. Curiously, if you're only in development mode, you can usually get by naming only the topmost module. But if you're in production mode, or if you have modules that potentially overlap, which is something we'll talk about a little more later when some questions come up, you need to be specific on exactly what components are in each module. So I think what this is pushing us toward a general case answer of, in an Angular 2 program, like, don't rely on it figuring out. Like, just go ahead and decide what components are in what modules and list them in the module definition. Okay. Now I need to go a bit farther to see a couple more variations. Okay, so up to here, here we're looking at just seeing the API in one file. But this is still not quite the idiomatic way to do it. The idiomatic way to do it that keeps things nice and simple are you write your bootstrap like so, 3 lines of code, and that seemed like not enough, so I put a couple blanks in there, 5 lines of code. You put your module in a different file than your bootstrap process. By the way, just as a naming, you put your Angular module in a different TypeScript module. So, and a TypeScript module is almost the same thing as an ES6 module, except that it has typing information attached. Right? So you'll be able to start catching these soon. I'm going to give a rule about how to talk about modules to make it easy. And once I do that, I can be called out on breaking my own rule. Okay, so this is more idiomatic. This is what the Angular CLI sets up for you. This is what you should do. The reason you should do it is that this dynamic part here, this platform browser dynamic, this means do just-in-time template compilation. If you do this right, the only difference you'll need to do pre-compilation of an Angular 2 program, we'll be able to make a different version of the main TS that has slightly different lines of code. So even the entire module definition should not be any different for doing pre-compilation versus runtime, just-in-time compilation. It should be You import something different, and you write a different code to call that different thing on line 5. I don't have that in front of me right now for the example, but you can see that this fully separates the module definition from the bootstrap process. We've chosen, in this example code, to name the file app.ts, thought about application.ts. That's intentional. In a sense, the top-level module of an Angular 2 application, as of RC5 in August 2016, the top-level module sort of is the application, right? And you've seen the word probably app component. Raise your hand if you've seen an app component in an example. I actually think that app component, that idea, we're kind of think that's the topmost component, but I no longer think of that topmost component as sort of representing the application. It's actually the topmost module that represents the application now. So I called it my app module. Is that a good name? I don't know. Maybe the style guide will tell me that's not a good name, but I think conceptually it makes sense. I love editing code live during talks. So I think this is also a reasonably good practice. I suggest when you're going to list a bunch of things in a JavaScript list that you put them on separate lines so that when you and your peers make edits, and do source control merges, those source control merges are easy. Yeah, the trailing commas, you can configure your linter to demand you always have a wasted final trailing comma. You can do leading commas, but that has a problem because then the first one is different. I don't have a good answer. Yeah. I mean, maybe one answer would be use a different programming language that has a syntax for lists that doesn't have commas in the middle. I don't know. Some of my other favorite programming languages, you just put white space between things to put them in a list, and they don't have this problem. Okay, so this is the same idea we just saw. There's no new concept here. We've just defined our Angular module in a different TypeScript module than the TypeScript module where we did our bootstrap. And we decided to call this thing, we decided to more explicitly think of the top-level module as the application. That's my phone making noise, hopefully for no good reason. Okay, so we have only a bit more to do here in terms of examples. Let me see if I can find that bit. Do you remember what that step was, Paul, the number?
For which feature?
Yep, here we can do it. Okay, so this is what you had to do through RC3 if you wanted to use the new forms in Angular 2. You had to disable the deprecated forms and provide the new forms. This whole mechanism around disabling and providing and bootstrapping has all changed. And so if I pop up a different step, which I think was two-way binding? Is this the one? Where's the step? Yes. This step shows a new way to do the same thing that I just showed. So the forms are in a module. That module is an imaginatively named forms module, and that's how you get NgModule. So if you want NgModule, you need to bring in the forms module. Okay? So this means that everything we've been doing up through RC4, where we had to go bring in those directives, go bring in those providers, that's all been bundled up. So we no longer should talk about or think about going and grabbing the providers I need to use this kit, this thing in my application. That's all bundled into the idea of the module. So forms module, that's giving me both the directives and any providers and anything else that forms need. Now I think there's another one I might be able to get to later. The same thing is true for HTTP, but you no longer say HTTP providers. You say, give me the HTTP module, for example. This means that Angular itself is actually broken into a number of modules with kind of somewhat reasonable names. Okay. And I think there was one more. Do you remember the number of the step we worked on the other day? Let's see if I can. 19. I got it. Yep. That's fine. Okay, so one more example. So again, exact same main TS that's bootstrapping a module. So here's just yet another variation of modules. Okay. So we used to sometimes list some providers when we bootstrapped. Well, that bootstrap has changed. You don't bootstrap components, you don't list providers, you bootstrap modules. modules list the providers they provide. So the things we used to bootstrap in our top-level application bootstrap, we now bootstrap in our top-level modules bootstrap list, or providers list. So I think that covers really the entirety of the added API, but there is one bit of deleted API. So I'm going to intentionally bring up some piece of code that has not been updated for RC5 yet.
You're at 20.
Great, because this is my last bit of content. Okay, so here is some code that has not been updated. That is deprecated. So with modules, you no longer say directives or pipes in your components. You move those things from your components to your modules. There's going to be a question, I know. That means that it used to be that you sort of defined the availability of pipes and components and directives component by a component. You now make those available module by module. So this is a strong force pushing you to not make huge modules. If your application has 497 components and you put those all in one module, you will have a very bad day understanding what your program does. Okay, so that's the last of my example. Let me see if I can pick up the rest of the content here. Okay, so you heard me fumble with the word module repeatedly. Naming is hard. I think there is a way to make it worse, and that's by using the same name for a bunch of adjacent concepts. And if someone does that to you, here is how you escape that, right? So someone has impinged on me by naming a bunch of concepts that I use all the time that are adjacent but critically different and giving them all the same name. The way you do it is just use fully scoped names. So something we are trying to do here is not say to each other, hey, what module is that in? We're trying to simply say you have to use more words. What TypeScript module is that in? What Angular module is that in? So it's not great. It means we're using two words where we'd like to use one word. But if you're part of the in crowd, you can just say the word module and it'll just work, right? Because humans are incredibly good at using context to understand the meanings of words. But if you're interacting with people who are at all just learning this stuff, the polite and useful thing to do is to use scoped language. So we are talking about Angular modules here, not modules. So that's it. Thanks for coming. We're going to have some Q&A and discussion. Maybe we'll do the first little bit and we'll record it in case anything seems worth covering more. Then we'll have more Q&A discussion and jabbering after we're done recording. So questions?
With the deprecation of pipes on that component you showed, Codalyzer doesn't complain about that now. Do you think that's going to be something that linting is going to point out in RC6 or in the future? Or is
RC5 just shipped, and it's a huge change.
Yeah.
Give the Codalyzer guys a break. So yes, absolutely. They're trying to keep up with Angular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, in RC6 that'll be a TypeScript error because pipes won't be a property on the annotation of component.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that aspect, and we probably have a whole bunch of those everywhere.
You will see this.
Yeah.
So just as if you said any other word that's not defined. And I should point out, if you follow the development of Angular 2, you just like literally read some pull requests, read some issues, read some commits that are going in. They are very aggressively deleting deprecated stuff. So RC6, yeah, it has some things added and fixed, and it has huge swaths of deletion. So that is one of them. It just that will not have any meaning or be valid. Go.
So providers. Before they had introduced, so in Angular 1, all services were global singletons. And then our Angular 2 came out and it was like, now we have kind of scoped singletons. So, your service can be constructed multiple times depending on where you declare it. It seemed like from my very quick glance at the new documentation that by putting them on modules, they've gotten rid of the hierarchy dependency injectors and that they're all globally scoped?
No, the DI is almost entirely unchanged. Pipes and directives, which are also components, those are deprecated out and going away. Providers works the same as it does before.
So you can still declare it on the module or on the component?
Saying it in the module is analogous to saying it in the bootstrap, which you could already do. So it's just you just move that code from one to the other.
Moving the other way.
And yeah, right. So there's still hierarchical DI. Providers works exactly the same. We had a spot where we thought we had found it didn't, and it was a very difficult and vexing problem that was not Angular's fault, which maybe we'll talk about after we're done with RC5 stuff. But yeah, it is exactly the same. Everything you know about DI is exactly still true.
But to that point, like, by experimenting this completely unrelated bug, we thoroughly beat up the DI system to test it.
Yes.
And it works exactly as it did before.
We are satisfied.
When you declare it on the component?
Yes.
So you have an app module, let's say you created a feature module, and you declare your service on the providers in the feature module, that's still technically global, right?
They flow down into other modules.
Yeah,
The
so-
DI flows across modules.
Yeah, so any other module can use that service, even though it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
There is some control over that. I don't remember the exact API. But generally speaking, yeah, you can still create the same hierarchical DI situations you could previously.
All right, just to clarify, building on your example, so starting with the top level app module, and then there's a lower level feature module. That feature module declares its own set of providers. Things in the app module couldn't use those providers, though.
No, but things in the app module will flow down the hierarchical DI and be available.
I swear I saw a line in there somewhere where it said that even though it looks like you're scoping those to the module, that really once the app module imports that, any modules imported by another module.
Oh, I see what you're
actually
saying.
Shared everywhere. It's
Yeah. I think they get merged for bootstrapping purposes. Yeah, I think that's true.
So I think
I believe
only
that's
if
true.
you declare it in the component annotation itself will
Yeah.
it actually still behave the way you did before.
Yeah, I believe the stuff that you jointly bootstrap, the stuff that you load all at the same time up front, it gets merged. And I can show you why that has to be true, right? That actually has to be true. Otherwise, they would break everything. And that would be obvious, right? Actually, it's obvious on all of these. Because the stuff in browser module, which includes some providers, if it wasn't available, your app wouldn't work.
But
Right.
that makes sense because
But the reason why I said-
top-level module.
The reason why there's a big asterisk on that is that if you do dynamic loading of another module to do lazy loading of routes, the providers in that, I mean, those haven't even been pulled over the network when your application bootstraps. So those will not get merged into your global bootstrap. I mean, your application doesn't even know if they exist. Yeah.
Maybe you just answered the question, but I'm trying to figure out the other way. I see that it totally makes sense that from the top level module, it flows downward, and everything
Yes.
that you've made available is then still available. But if some later on lazy loaded module comes in and it has providers, then what happens?
I have not tested that. What I think will happen is that its providers will be available to it. I do not know if anyone has made any effort to make it like go back and retroactively merge those into the top. I don't know why they would, because most of the things that would rely on that top DI have already been instantiated. But I would say from what I've seen of this, if you're writing applications where that question matters, you're probably doing it wrong.
Well,
And there's actually a lot of things in Angular where people ask questions that seem like hard-hitting questions, and the ultimate answer is,
don't do it that way.
yeah, don't, like, the thing you're trying to do, understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then solve that problem in the way that the thing is made to support solving that problem.
Yeah, I don't actually want it to work. Our discussion was leading me to think that it was supposed to, which didn't make a lot of sense.
No, because the whole point of the lazy loaded stuff is you don't know anything about that module until you load it. If this module lazily loaded some other module, that other module would not be listed in the imports. Because like it literally doesn't even, you wouldn't even have the identifier, right? you couldn't even say the word of the other module because you don't have a dependency on it. You have to take a dependency on it to even say its name. More, yeah.
So what if your lazy loaded module has a provider that conflicts with, like, you declare the same provider in two separate modules because you're developing these independently and they both rely on the same service. Do you get a new instance of that provider, or does it?
So a key fact, hardly anybody knows yet because the mainstream tooling doesn't support lazy loading yet. And so lots of things that we'll all be able to talk about with great firmness once we're doing them in our applications, we're not really doing them much in our applications because, like Angular CLI, doesn't know how to wire things up for lazy loading yet. Right now you have to do this manual kind of ad hoc process to even create the bundles you need to make lazy loading even work. So I think RC 6 or 7 is where we're going to get heavily into the exact semantics of lazy loading. Yeah. But what was it you were wondering?
Lazy load side even.
So what I hope
It's very
happens.
possible that you have the same class listed in a
Okay,
in a provider
so-
in your module.
So I can give here's a concrete example. Hopefully, I don't know if we have much of him on the recording, but concrete example. My application module and my two aggressively loaded, preloaded modules use HTTP.
Right.
A lazy loaded thing also uses HTTP. The only sane thing that can happen is that it uses the HTTP that's already loaded. It doesn't make its own extra instance, right? Since these are like really sane, really smart people, I'm confident the eventual answer will be what I just said. But in terms of what it does today, I don't know, and I can't easily experiment because the tooling has not yet coalesced around actually making lazy loading possible. We just got all the underlying mechanism we need to even do lazy loading right in RC5. So like that's still kind of on the to-do list to get to final.
Well, I think an important point is that, so in your module declaration, you have the providers array. But if you have a service, let's say logger service, that you're sharing across multiple modules, you should not have module A and B both say providers logger service. They should be importing the common services module in which you've declared logger service. So nothing should be declared twice. It should always be declared in a module.
And actually, let me point this out. I had this to make that exact point. So if you have, I've drawn this as having some components that are shared across multiple modules, and it's equally true of things you want to provide. And the answer is you don't do that, right? If there's something you want to use from multiple other modules, don't have each module provide it and hope that they somehow don't clash. You make a module that owns that thing. You take an intermodule dependency, right? So I don't make my two things both try to provide HTTP crap.
What if they're common libraries from other projects?
What if they are
I want a shared library that has a dependency on a logger that's used in multiple projects. Project A
Right.
doesn't bring in logger, project
So-
B does for other reasons.
We are in, like, I want to take you back to like 1997, the early days of Java, before we learned what would happen when 1,000 smart people at 1,000 smart companies across the world created 1,000 different frameworks. It was wonderful back then. If all you have is a fresh new module system and no one's written modules yet, it's awesome. In reality, yeah, this is going to become a challenge. So all these challenges that we faced in other programming contexts, things like that, yeah, we're probably going to end up with 15 different logger implementations. I would have an XKCD ready if I had known you were going to ask about it. We're going to have like multiple attempts to unify ideas with modules that try to arbitrate all the other modules. Yeah, and we're building big things. I got you. We're building big things on the front end in TypeScript with Angular with multiple overlapping module systems. All the categories of interesting things that have happened with all the other languages, we're going to reinvent them all again and experience them all again here. It's the circle of life. Somebody sing for me. What do you got, Bill?
Well, let's get away from everybody inventing their own homegrown logging system. let's use your HTTP example.
Sure.
I want to build a module that is everything that is required to talk to some API. And I want to allow, random Angular applications out there to pull in my module and have everything they need in order to talk to that API. Well, that means that my module is going to need to be able to say, I got to use HTTP.
Yes. And it should.
That seems like the right thing for it to do. It should
Yes.
be black box. It should be a completely standalone, encapsulated thing.
Sure.
So, how does that impact what you're saying here? Because I mean that seems to be a major feature of the module system.
Well, and when that works, that's great. The thing that's irritating is when 6 different organizations that you're bringing in third-party stuff have 6 different HTTP wrappers and they all use their own. And they have like different ways of wrapping HTTP. And you want to figure out how to get them all to cooperate, use the same wrapper. I think that's the kind of question Paul was getting to. But yeah, in the simple case, yes, absolutely. It does that. We have seen it do that. I didn't run the code because you can't tell anything when it's running. But yes, that works great. What you're saying, it works today wonderfully.
I think what he's saying is like, I've provided HTTP in 2 spots because I have to.
No.
Which one won?
No, you don't.
Well, I have to.
No, you don't. Let me show you. When we look at a definition of a module, actually, I have one that uses HTTP.
Yeah, is the Starship API example updated?
No, we're not fully updated yet. I was hoping to find one that uses HTTP. I don't
think we have an updated one.
I don't think we do. No, yeah, we still have old stuff. Okay, but I can just tell you. So, or I can just type something if I have to. So if you need HTTP and you think, oh, I need HTTP, right? This is what you're talking about, right? You want to do this?
Well, I don't know if I want to do it at the top level, though. That's the thing.
Okay, pretend there's somewhere, anywhere in your code, you want to do this. At some module, you want to do this, right? This is your question? Okay. So in RC5, you could do this, and I have no idea what will happen. But I don't care, because I've already read the commit that deletes that in RC6. You can't, this is not the mechanism. You don't share by you providing it and me providing it.
So it's pulling the modules.
Yeah. This thing here has been deleted from Angular.
So my custom API module is going to depend upon the Angular built-in
HTTP module. So things that you were doing by just saying, hey, I need to go grab this pile of providers and throw them in the bucket, and you got to go grab that pile of directions, throw them in the bucket. You don't do that anymore. So your third-party thing should have a module, and it will depend on other modules it needs. And there'll be providers and other stuff inside those, but you don't just like ad hoc everybody go grab the HTTP providers. They have deleted it to make sure you can't.
So both modules have grabbed a dependency on browser module then?
No. Well, yes, the browser module, that's how you get things like if and for to work.
question on that.
If you want, it's actually this.
Okay, so
Yes.
so our modules have taken a dependency on HTTP modules,
Yes.
and one of them has depended upon the other. So now we have 2 separate ones brought in together, having a dependency on HTTP module. Theoretically, what's going on behind the scenes? Did they both set up their own HTTP providers, now explicitly have 2 different providers for HTTP?
No, when the thing bootstraps, it walks all of your pre-wired modules. It gathers up all the stuff that has to be, that all the dependencies, they all throw their stuff into the big monster top-level bootstrapped providers list. They all get provided once.
Okay, that answers the question I've been
Yes.
trying to get at.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this dependency, the course dependency tree of modules that we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
In this top level module, you said import browser module. And
Yes.
that's what gives us ngIf, ng4, things like that.
The browser
right?
stuff, yeah.
Right. Do we need to do that for every module, or does that trickle down into other modules that are used within the application?
I'm not sure if you need to. It's possible something will leak over and your thing will work if you don't, but you're supposed to.
Okay.
If your module depends on something, you're supposed to, well, just like, okay, so think about as of RC4, right? There's lots of places you could just sort of say, well, I know I need this, so I'm just going to assume somebody has put it in the global DI and it'll work, right? But I probably should document it somehow. I probably should somehow have a dependency on a thing I depend on. Still true. Yeah.
Prior to NgModule,
Yes.
we were listing explicitly every component that every component depended upon as well.
I agree. And we could probably talk another half an hour on that one, but there's a question over here.
So like an hour ago, I created a feature module.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
well, I actually have several modules, so I have one that just has services, so it doesn't import anything because, well, maybe it imports HTTP module, but it
Sure.
doesn't do any, it doesn't have any templates. So it doesn't need browser module.
It has no, right, if it has no components in it,
I created a module, like a common components module.
Sure.
And I tried importing that into my app, and my app module had all the crap in it,
Yep.
and it didn't work because it didn't know what ng class was, it didn't know what ngIf was.
Yeah.
So I had to explicitly import common module. I'm not really sure what this is.
I didn't list common module. Yeah, you know what, I think if and
common and it worked.
if and for are actually, yeah, this is actually incorrect. I have a later example that's more correct, but there's a common module you need also.
Yeah.
And if this is one of those things where we're going to have to get used to knowing what we need what for, but I believe if you use the CLI, by default you get at least these three and possibly more.
So, but my point is, my module had just some components shared. It did not work unless I explicitly imported common module
Yes.
in my feature module.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I prefer
Yeah.
what you're describing.
That's how it's supposed to work. So see, there's this edge. There's things that I've been studying how they're supposed to work, and I can tell you that's how it's supposed to work, but that's kind of past the edge. There's sort of the edge of, we've actually already upgraded a surprising amount of code here at Oasis Digital in the, a week since RC5 came out, and that stuff I can actually say, yes, this is exactly how it works. But yeah, it's easy to find areas that we have not had time in the 1 week to be able to tell you absolutely. So sorry.
Well, it broke and then I added that.
Yeah. Yeah, go. So I'm going to poke the bear a little bit.
Poke the bear? Am I the bear?
Yeah. Yep. So with declarations being done at the module level, it looks like we're heading back to the bad old days of NgApp and top-level component definitions that suck. Or module definitions that suck.
This is okay, so my least, I don't have a good way to show this in code. Well, actually, you know what? I can,
You got 3 component.
yeah, I do. I do have I have right here. In fact, let's see all those different components. Okay, so prior to NgModule, you would say this green component, see how it uses this blue thing? Prior to NgModule, I would have said directives : blue component. That's kind of the easy part. More importantly, I would have had to import it. So alpha 20, isn't that when we started on alpha 20 or so? So alpha 20 through RC4, what I thought was an amazing, wonderful feature of Angular 2 is that you were forced to have the dependency graph of your TypeScript modules match the dependency graph implied by the contents of your templates. So if you think back to the Angular 1 days, for those viewers and people here who have been doing Angular 1 forever, Angular 1, like if you're reading an Angular 1 template, the algorithm for understanding the meaning of the words in the template was to literally or conceptually execute the entire Angular 1 program to understand if anywhere in your entire Angular 1 program someone had declared a directive that gave some meaning to some words in your template. Does everybody follow me on that mental algorithm, right? So at scale, that was really, really terrible, right? Angular 2 through RC4 turned that knob all the way the other direction and said, everything you need to understand what's in your template is either going to be listed as a documented hard dependency for everyone to see with an import, or it's going to be in a short list of globally available things. Okay? I really liked that. I got a lot of mileage out of that. I think that would support some fantastic tooling. We teach classes. We've probably taught that fact to 500 to 1,000 people so far. That was great. So I'm feeling a little grief and loss of that. I think that was a fantastic feature. I'm not the only one. There's a bunch of people on the Angular 2, GitHub Angular/Angular issue tracker saying what I said, some of them more aggressively than I have. So while I'm kind of reluctantly on board with the kind of tedium of having to do this, I can see it's necessary to support lazy loading, I'm really feeling a sense of loss of not having to say import blue card right here. I thought that was a really useful feature to make it more reasonable for a large number of developers to work together at scale on an Angular 2 program. Yeah.
But you have gained something. So before, let's say you have a folder, you have an order folder for your order page.
Sure.
Okay. And so you've got some directives and components defined in there, and they're used in multiple places. So in every single place they're used, you have to declare them and this and that. But with the modules, you create a feature module, you declare all those things in the feature module, and they're only visible within that module unless you explicitly export certain
right.
ones. So it gives you a better way to organize and scope things.
Well, I would say the way we had it before, it was tedious, detailed, and very direct. Right? You could always do a simple one-step lookup. If it's used here, it's either in the short global list or it's documented there. Right? With the new way of thinking, if I want to understand the meaning of this template, here's my algorithm. Okay? The algorithm to understand the meaning of the template. First, I need to follow the non-visible backward link of this to the module where it's defined. So there is no dependency I can follow from here. There's no dependency the TypeScript compiler can follow from here. I have to understand that here is the module that depends on that component. Now, I have to step into all the other components in the declaration list and see if they define a selector which might give meaning to my template. You follow me? So I have to look, like I can't just read this as I have to actually click into each one and parse, either with the program or with my brain, the selectors of all those components and see if any of them gave meaning to any words in this template. But that's not all. I then need to step into all the imported modules, and either by reading the documentation for browser module or by looking at their module definition, I need to step through everything in the declarations of all of those components and see if they defined any selectors that gave meaning to what was in my template.
Those modules have to explicitly export.
Yes, you're right. It's true that I only need to look at the ones listed in the exports list.
If you have a bunch of modules, it sort of features.
Yeah, it's not that bad, right?
Forgetting modules that export a whole bunch of common crap.
Right, but
like if you have feature modules, they're only going to export like one component.
So you're saying forgetting those.
Okay, yeah.
Well, this is an important. So I feel like modules are giving power to people like some people in our live audience today who have been thinking about how to do this well for a year, right? However, I feel like this mechanism is also handing some rope to people who are going to accidentally hang themselves with it. Are you raising your hand that you agree?
I am very much hanging myself with this one.
Right.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Chris.
I'm on Team Chris.
Yes.
We're all on Team Chris.
So let me ask a question, because I'm not recommending we do this, but wouldn't it be fair to say that if we wanted to get back what you're describing, like the usefulness that we've given up in order to get this module system,
I like that, yeah.
couldn't we put every single component in its own module? So we'd essentially pull the decorator apart, NgModule and app component, or add NgModule and module and app component.
So this is actually, this segues into a topic that I was hoping somebody should ask about, but nobody did.
Here I am.
How big should my modules be?
Yeah, I'm going there.
Right?
too.
How big should my modules be? So unfortunately, I think there are two kind of smart-ass answers, right? One component each, or all one huge module, right? That's the first two ideas everybody has. I'm going to defeat this thing. I'm going to make one big, huge module. Or I'm going to defeat this thing. I'm going to make one module for each component. There are powerful forces making both of those bad. And in fact, this is modularity like I've been thinking about modularity for a couple decades now, right? This is modularity as we have known it. That means how big should my modules be? They should be big enough but not too big. How many modules should I have? You should have a medium number of modules. So really, there are forces that are going to make you not find a way to cheat the system, but rather to find a way to use the system in a responsible way by having a moderate number of moderately sized modules.
And that's actually what I was going to say, that in practice, I think this will actually be very effective. And I think there's one piece of this that this possibly buys us that Angular 1 was extraordinarily good at, and Angular 2 has not been very good at up until possibly this point. And maybe this is where you're going to go, Chris. Angular 1 had this great feature that I don't think people took nearly enough advantage of, and that was the template and the code could really be two separate things. You, as a developer, you could build a wonderful set of little directive Legos that you could then turn your non-coder people loose with them and say, you own the template. You can do things with the template, and
You're saying because you don't have to edit the imports up here on line 2?
Pulling this stuff into this module system now gives us, the developer, a way of saying, here, non-programmer, here is your pile of Legos. Within this pile, go nuts. It's all for you.
I mean, maybe, but
I think Angular 2 has been very good at that up to this point. I think it's a lot better with this.
I'm skeptical of how much this helps that, but I'm open to it. Sure.
I just think that this gives us a way that we can possibly emphasize that, which, frankly, up until this point, I've always felt like I was having to scale that back. Angular 1 classes, I was all over that. I'm like, this is a very powerful mechanism that you as a developer can use to release yourself from maintaining the templates. You are the builder of the components. You let someone else build, put them together however you want. Angular 2, the template very much became part of the code.
So the reason why I'm not that sold on it is that even through RC4, you could do this.
The platform directives thing?
Yeah, you could say I'm going to make this kit of directives. These are my kit relative to my context and my giant enterprise. I'm going to make them globally available so you don't have to manage the dependencies by hand. And you could do that really easily already. So I'm skeptical how much more it buys it.
Why? But that to me felt much more like I'm going to misuse this feature of the framework.
Oh, definitely. I would say that because
make it something legitimate.
Because this was kind of difficult to use, this had changed like 4 times in the last, like in this year or something. The new way is much better for that. But yeah.
Well, so we were using the heck out of that.
Yeah, sure.
So I feel like for us, this is a big net gain because as far as feature modules,
This is right. You can do this nicely now,
yeah,
right?
So we can do
Yeah,
that nicely.
yeah,
We were
absolutely.
already throwing it on global,
Yep.
whatever.
Absolutely.
So we already had those issues. But then the ability to create a feature module, a big application with lots of,
Sure.
and having those contained in
Yeah.
more than just saying, well, it's all in the same folder. Actually
Sure.
having real containment.
So it sounds like you're on board with having a medium number of medium-sized modules that kind of represent conceptual features.
Yeah, we need that.
Yeah, Team Chris.
Yeah.
That is the name
Yeah.
for the strategy.
So I'm going to make this my final thing I say because we've been going much too long now, and that is that I think this, like looking at just RC4 versus RC5 NgModules, has kind of turned the knob on Angular 2 a little bit. It's made it less appealing to people at the small end, first getting started, but it's made it more appealing to people building giant things. And as a person who's like most of our work is hanging at those two ends of that spectrum, part of me is really happy, the part that builds giant things, and part of me that teaches people just learning it is kind of sad. And so I'm kind of torn by RC5 NgModules. So I think that's my final comment.